as with the earlier tutorials that I walked through, I ran into a few questions, and luckily for Jane, she could just email them over to her friend Thomas. How does that work? I don't know. Anyone seen a Thomas around? If you're listening and you have questions, I might not be able to answer everything, but definitely, send me a message. So she says Thomas was quick to either respond or do a video call with her to walk through them. So she says one of the first things that I ran into is the concept of default and named components. This is not maybe a React-specific idea, but actually just a vanilla JavaScript concept and kind of a newer one. So this might be something less familiar to Jane, if she learned older JavaScript. But export is used in JavaScript to export values from a module. Every module can have two different types of export, named and default. So it turns out exporting a default component she says the default way to approach components. I've seen both, but she says the developer doing the exporting doesn't have to give the component a name, and the developer writing the import has the freedom to name the component whatever they want. Only one default function is allowed in each file. I will come in here and say you can actually rename named exports as well, but I don't think we've gotten there yet with Jane. So she says exporting a named component requires the developer writing the export to give a specific name to a component. This allows the developer to include multiple components within the same file. It also forces the developer importing to use the same name. Like I mentioned, that's not actually true. It is the easiest way to work with things. And Jane says that as she dug into this, she discovered that there are many very strong opinions about what is the right way to handle exports and imports. It brought back memories of the spaces versus tabs debates that always seem to pulse beneath the surface of a software team. How should you handle white space in a file? 2 spaces, 4 spaces, a tab? I guess she hasn't been in the React world long enough at this point to know that they've settled this. You use prettier and whatever's built into VS Code and the defaults, and just it handles it, right? But yeah, absolutely right. I think this is actually a bigger deal than spaces versus tabs. Maybe I have strong opinions too, right? That would never happen, right? So she says it seems like most React developers prefer to export a single default component from every file. This leads to the creation of many files. But if the whole team agrees on a file and folder structure, it doesn't get too out of hand. Many people like that with the default export and import, everything has its own place and it's not mixing. I think that this stems from a larger trend in software that says that more modular means more maintainable. This can be seen everywhere, from microservices to the whole idea of agile development, stories, sprints, that kind of thing, And another one of the arguments for default exporting all the things that I found to be a bit funny was related to the popular text editor VS Code. I haven't verified this, but Jane says apparently VS Code does not allow the user to open the same file in 2 tabs within the same instance of VS Code with different cursor positions and such. So if you want to refer to a point lower in a file while editing a spot higher in the file, you have to open up a new VS Code instance. Therefore, developers are just moving to smaller files. It seems to me that if your tool is forcing you to change how you're writing software, you might want to find a new tool. There are so many text editors out there. Of course, I will jump in here, and I didn't know this about VS Code, but it actually explains a lot. For the longest time, I've wondered why programmers do this, and I really think a lot of it comes down to VS Code and maybe some other editors like it. But someone that's been using Emacs for a lot of years, Emacs allows you to open the same file in multiple panes or windows and have multiple, each one has its own cursor positions, its own state, everything. And so the way that I prefer to develop is I have one big file, just one file with everything in it. And I will put like code comments that are searchable. So, if I have a section for, just components, I'll have a comment that's like / components. And so anywhere in this, this file will be open in like 8 different panes in my window in Emacs, or 4 different panes or whatever. So I can be in any of them, and I'm like, oh, I want the components section. Oh, that's Control S or Control R to, search. And I just start typing components. It takes me right there. I hit enter. I don't have to, deal with another dialogue that's like, hey, you have 30,000 files named page.jsx, and these are the 3 that contain the word components. And, so I'm used to working in this very, like, just one file. I don't need to ever look. What file is this in? It's not a question. It's all in one file. And I could just use the normal search to find everything I want. And I organize it, and it works really well for me. But I've found on projects this doesn't work well for most people. And now I'm learning a big part of this is actually due to limitations in the editor or the user interface. So I could go on and on about this, but it's very frustrating. I'm not totally opposed to some amount of files. Like I do have sometimes I will divide things into files, but a file, like I worked in a project where every single component had its own folder, and inside that folder was an index file. And then there's another file for the component and another file for the styles. And every single time you edit this index file to import and then re-export everything, I was like, this is so completely pointless. Like, what a waste of my time. What a waste of, oh, I want to rename something. I got to open this other file and rename it in here. I honestly don't see the point. I'm sure there's other people out there with strong opinions. And if you have a good reason, I'm genuinely curious. If you really think there is some advantage to a bunch of files, I want to hear about it. Like, what am I missing, So, yeah, that's my 2 cents on this. I guess I'm in Jane's boat as well. Like, why do we need this many files? Some, sure, but like, do I really need that many? Yeah,